Thank you, Leah. And good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Happy that you were all able to make it to the Zoom land on this Friday. I see so many familiar names and faces. Welcome. And if I can just share my screen, I know I'm a little bit more competent than this. Here we go. All right, if you see my screen share, just give me a quick thumbs up to help me know that I'm on the right track. Awesome. Thank you, Emmeline and Jess and Catherine and Joanne and Pat and Hannah for giving me that thumbs up. So welcome to Trauma Responsive Family Engagement in Early Childhood, Part 2. So for those who were able to join us last month for Part 1, or if you were able to view it on the YouTube page, we covered a lot of strategies in Part 1. And to not rush us through it, we ended up with 2 parts. So today we're going to really talk about state-dependent functioning, which is really our brains and neuroscience and what that really means in regards to trauma and families and ourselves as supporters of young children and families in early childhood. And then we're going to talk about applying what we call family strengths and some principles to disrupt inequities regarding trauma responsive family engagement in early childhood. So I'm Shawn Bryant, for those who don't know. This is my 30th year in early childhood. Woo, I made it 30 years so far. 30 more, right? 30 more. These are my godchildren you see. You see Shola over my shoulder. That's Buhai, my 10-year-old godson, who many of you who've been in trainings with me over the years, when he was a Head Start kid and we were having lots of difficulties, you heard me sharing lots of stories about him and how his temperament and my temperament are different. And in the front there, there's 5-year-old Madison, my youngest godchild. That was us in downtown Oakland, having fun and them spending all of my money playing games. What you see here now is just a little bit about me. So for those who don't know me, these are a lot of the core themes that kind of guide my work in early childhood, that guide my thinking, and that I hold near and dear in terms of the PDs that I offer regarding training, coaching, and consulting. And I continue to do this work 30 years in, because I really believe and hope that by supporting adults who care and educate young children in a variety of different settings, places, and spaces, that parallel process, if I can afford those adults opportunities from the inside out, then they can afford young children those opportunities and their families to become positive, productive citizens. I believe it's possible, and it starts in early childhood. For those who visit social media, I encourage you to join in and jump with me on your favorite social media platform. A lot more coming soon. I have some young people helping me. They told me, you get on social media like an old person. And I said, I guess I am an old person and I'm cool with that. I know some people who didn't make it this far, so they're determined to help me move everything to social media. So I'm excited. So join me there and see what happens in the coming weeks and months. In this virtual learning process, we're going to raise awareness about state-dependent functioning, learn some new skills, and practice one skill. I encourage you to grab a pen and paper in this virtual learning process to write down your thoughts, your feelings, so that you can stay engaged. So as your brain and your thoughts are activated, you can capture those in meaningful ways. Leah has put access to the PowerPoint, and it should be the copy, Leah. That's not the original, right, Leah? It's a PDF, right, Leah, that we're sharing?
Yeah, that's just the PDF.
Okay, I got nervous for a minute. And the link to Part 1 for those who might need that, she put that in the chat also. As always, I jump ahead and create community agreements for us. Your voices are encouraged and welcomed here. Please, please If it's relevant to the topic, unmute. We just ask you not to attempt to sell anything in the chat or to offer advice to anyone else on the chat, okay? We believe your experience and your wisdom offer a lot in terms of this path towards trauma-responsive family engagement in the 21st century. And we just ask you to be open to new ways of knowing and to focus on what you can take back to your agency, your school, your program, your clinic, regarding your role and responsibility. And as always, we invite you to unmute, but to also use the chat to stay engaged, to share your thoughts. So in part one, we talked about not having breakout rooms just because this topic of trauma can activate some of us. And there was no way we could have someone in every single breakout room to monitor. And we honor that in the first one. We will have one short breakout room in this one, and I'm excited about it. But what you're going to discuss, it won't be elevating in that way, which is why we will have one breakout room. But because we're still talking about trauma, and we all have our own traumas, the question that you'll be addressing in the breakout room will really be one of something that we can all think about and handle independently. So in part one, we overviewed 21st century family engagement and trauma-informed and trauma responsiveness and the difference. In part two, we're going to look at state-dependent functioning in applying strengths and assets to disrupt inequities in family engagement in early childhood. And again, in full disclosure, this training comes from the book that I'm a contributing author on, Trauma Responsive Family Engagement in Early Childhood Practices for Equity and Resilience. In disclosure, I share that, and then if you read that, you see that all the authors have agreed to receive no compensation and no honoraria from the proceeds from the book. All proceeds from this book go to Parent Voices Oakland. So I share that just so people don't think I'm pushing a book to put $1 in my pocket. I just find it necessary to share that for those who may be interested in actually purchasing the book. So we're going to open our session with a short video. It's about 6 minutes long, and it's from the author of a book that some of you may be familiar with, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, the author of The Body Keeps Score. So here you're going to listen to him talking about, in this provocative short video, how our bodies remember. So when you watch this video, I want you to watch it with two lenses. Of course, watch it from your own perspective, your own experience, your own circumstances and situations. But as helpers, as supporters, as teachers, as program people with roles and responsibilities to assist and support our youngest citizens and their families in our roles in becoming trauma responsive and moving from being trauma informed. Think about the families in your program that you may have already served, the ones that you're serving, or the ones that you may serve in the near or far future, around how some of these pieces show up when you're engaging with families. And I want us to hold that as something to anchor us throughout this journey together today. All right?
The most important thing to know is that there's a difference between trauma and stress. As I like to say to people, life sucks a good amount of the time. We all have jobs and situations that are really unpleasant. But the moment that situation is over, it's over. The problem with trauma is that when it's over, your body continues to relive it. My name is Bessel van der Kolk. I'm a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and author of the book, The Body Keeps Score. I got interested in trauma on my first day working at the Veterans Administration. 1978 was the year, and the Vietnam War was over by about 6 or 7 years. The very first day that I met Vietnam veterans, I was just blown away. These were guys who were my age, who were clearly smart and competent and athletic, and they clearly were just a shadow of their former self. Their bodies were clearly affected by trauma, and they had a very hard time connecting with new people after the war. Around that time, a group of us started to define what trauma is, and in the definition of PTSD, we write, these people have been exposed to an extraordinary event that is outside of normal human experience. In retrospect, that shows us how ignorant and narrow-minded we were, because it turned out that this is not an unusual experience at all. People usually think about the military when they talk about trauma, but at least 1 out of 8 kids in America witness physical violence between their parents. A larger number of kids get beaten very hard by their own caregivers. A very large number of people in general, but women in particular, have sexual experiences that were clearly unwanted and that left them confused and enraged. So, unlike what we first thought, trauma is actually extremely common. There's a lot of debate of what a trauma is to this day. But basically, trauma is something that happens to you that makes you so upset that it overwhelms you. There is nothing you can do to stave off the inevitable. You basically collapse in a state of confusion, maybe rage, because you are unable to function in the face of this particular threat. But the trauma is not the event that happens, the trauma is how you respond to it. One of the largest mitigating factors against getting traumatized is who is there for you at that particular time. When, as a kid, you get bitten by a dog, it's really very scary and very nasty. But if your parents pick you up and say, "Oh, I see that you're really in bad shape, let me help you," that dog bite doesn't become a big issue because the foundation of your safety has not been destroyed. We are profoundly interdependent people, and as long as our relationships are intact, by and large, we're pretty good with trauma. It's a subjective experience, and what may be traumatic for you may not be traumatic for me, depending on our personality and our prior experiences. The problem with trauma is that it starts off with something that happens to us, but that's not where it stops, because it changes your brain. Much of the imprint of trauma is in that very primitive survival part of your brain that I like to call the cockroach brain. There's a part of you that just picks up what's dangerous and what's safe. And when you're traumatized, that little part of your brain, which is usually very quiet, continues to just send messages. I'm in danger. I'm not safe. That event itself is over, but you continue to react to things as if you're in danger. We're talking about survival. We're talking about staying alive. And so some people go into fight-flight, or on a more primitive level, people's brain shuts down and they collapse. You have these automatic responses that are not a product of your cognitive assessment, they're a product of your animal brain trying to stay alive in the face of something that that part of your brain interprets as a life threat. And the problem then becomes that you are not able to engage, or to learn, or to see other people's point of view, or to coordinate your feelings with your thinking. Traumatized people have a tremendous problem experiencing pleasure and joy. But the core issue is our hormones and our physiological impulses that have to do with survival. Your body keeps mobilizing itself to fight. You have all kinds of immunological abnormalities, endocrine abnormalities, and that really devastates your physical health also. Oftentimes the physical problems are longer lasting than the mental problems. And the other thing that is terribly important is the impact of poverty, or the impact of racism, or the impact of unemployment. There's other societies that are much more trauma savvy than we are, where there is not an enormous amount of income inequality. Healthcare is universal, childcare is universal. A culture like that really looks at what are the antecedents for certain forms of pathology. So the big issue is a political issue. How do we rearrange our society to really know about trauma so that people who grow up under extreme adverse conditions can become full-fledged members of society? The sense of community and people being there for each other is a critical part of surviving and thriving.
Get smarter faster with new videos every week from the world's biggest thinkers.
All right, let's all take a breath for a moment, because Dr. Vanderkolk said a lot there. And I shared this video as an opening because if anyone was paying attention to all the points that he made, because he made a variety of them, everything he said links to family engagement and how we work with, against, and for our families and our parents. All that he said was really, families are going to show up across the continuum in terms of engagement, in terms of involvement. And you all know I like to say from little t to big T in terms of traumatic experiences or the traumas that they bring, or, you know, the number of their ACE scores. But regardless of where they are, what he's saying is when they interact with us, it may not be their present memory that's showing up. And this is what happens when you deal with agitated families or parents. It's their body remembering the trauma that seems familiar in that moment. It's their past showing up. And it becomes really important for us as we start exploring state-dependent functioning to understand what that means and the position and the stance that we need to take when that happens, because it will happen. The other part, I really like Bessel, because he's one of those people that says, you know, I did this back then and it was a mistake. He really speaks out, you know, against the DSM. He says, you know, it doesn't make the best therapist. When I heard him say that, I was like, ooh, he's speaking my language. And I started following him in really honoring his position on so much of our thinking around supporting people who may have experienced trauma or who just want support and help can't always come from, you know, that box or that book. And he speaks tremendously about the topic. But I wanted you all to get from this that when parents and families show up, a lot of what you may experience is their body remembering. So here's the example I'll use before I move on. So I do some work in San Francisco with this project that the city and county of San Francisco had given $3 million really to support the dwindling Black population. So we've met for a year on Saturdays, lots of education, lots of training. And we were really looking at the Black population in San Francisco around their heart rate variability, that when Black identified people experience trauma in video, in the news, in real time, what happens in terms of how their body metastasizes it, and what do we need to do, or what things can happen to bring them back to calm. And in one of the sessions when I was speaking and talking about, prior to age 3, our memories are stored in our amygdala, which is our fear center, and then they shift at around age 3 to the hippocampus, which is why we can't remember being 1 year old. Then someone says, I remember being 1. And I said, you do? She says, I got bit by a dog. Someone else says, I remember I don't think I was 2. I almost drowned. So for people who know me, I was like this on the Zoom. Because of course I was holding, and then someone else unmuted and said, I remember being 1 too. For those who were listening to me, all 3 of those memories were what? What were they? Someone unmute and say what they were.
Traumatic.
Caritha, say it again.
Traumatic.
They were trauma memories. Their body remembered the trauma, which is why they remembered it. Most of us don't remember just having our diaper changed in our mother or Abuelita or Nan smiling at us. Most of us don't remember, moving from breast milk to mashed potatoes and solids. We don't have those memories. Flandra's laughing. But they were under the impression that they could remember. Our body remembers the trauma because of what happened. Your families, your parents, their bodies are holding on to sometimes generational aspects that show up when they engage with you. All right, let's move forward because we're going to unpack that again later around them remembering. So what you see on the screen is what Dr. Bruce Perry calls state-dependent functioning. State-dependent functioning. So Dr. Perry moves on to talk about the states of our emotions and stress. They kind of move up and down this arousal continuum that we use the staircase to represent, that you're going to get introduced to in 3 more slides. And that we move up and down that arousal continuum throughout the day, from calm to alert to fear, or sometimes even terror. Everyone does this. The families that you engage with do this. You might even do it. So moving up that continuum, our stress response system is activated, right? We get close to what we call hyperarousal. Hyperarousal is oftentimes what we name fight or flight. I'm fighting, through my voice, I'm yelling, I'm resisting, or I'm flighting. I just leave and I say, you know what, I'm just gonna grab my bag and I'll go. I'll take my child and I'll go. We'll find another school, we'll find another program. That's sometimes a flight response. Or hypoarousal, where they're kind of stuck. We call that what? A freeze state. You can't get a response. They're not fighting you, they're not running away. They're kind of just stuck in the moment. Moving down that continuum, our stress response can become less activated as we connect to calm. Now you're going to hear me talking about moving up and down this step. And when I get to that slide, when we move down the step, we're getting to calm, but in our brain is actually the opposite way. So connecting to calm is our prefrontal cortex, right? So when we move up the step, we're getting closer to fear and terror, but in our brains, that's the base of our brain, the most primitive piece. So we talk about it in reverse to how our brains are, just because we use the step from bottom to top. But when we connect to calm, here is where parents and families think clearer, because their prefrontal cortex is helping them. In this thinking clear and having clarity, they're making logical decisions and they're able to problem solve. They're able to problem solve. But when we're not there, when they're not there, they can't problem solve. Their brains, my brain, your brain, all of our brains are always taking an input from our sensory systems of what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and even perceive. Because remember, your perception is what? Your reality, specifically when it comes to trauma. If I present and perceive Leah to be a threat, guess what Leah is? She's a daggone threat, even if she believes she presents no threat to me at all. Our past experiences in terms of trauma It's really big around these perceptions of threat and fear and our internal states. Our prior experiences, our histories, meaning families' prior experiences, parents' prior histories, can take them to what my friend Rainbow Markel, she likes when I use this word, they can send us spiraling into a sunken place. You may be interacting with the parent and family, and they show up in that sunken place and you don't realize it, and you're wondering why they're responding with so many threats and fear is because their prior histories. That video can position families in a sunken place, and you don't know it, and you don't know it. So because our internal state is continuously monitoring our external environment, because that's what kept our ancestors alive. They needed to monitor to make sure that they weren't going to be the breakfast or the lunch for the animals when they lived in huts and tents. So that's the basis of our brain. The first part is to scan for what threats. That's natural and normal, but we don't want to stay there and function there 24/7, all right? Because the functioning of that state-dependent brain says it's responding to internal and external input. So that means your families are responding to their own internal systems and those external systems that are when they show up at our school, our program, our clinic, our training, our workshop, whatever it is, what we have and how we are can actually cause more fear and threat, or it can lessen the fear and threat. And we should be taking account of that early and often. So our parents and families, their capacities at any moment, at any day, the circumstance and situation is what we like to call fluid. It's fluid because it's taking in their emotional, their social, their physical, their regulatory, and their cognitive capacities. They're shifting. They're shifting with their internal states. Their children are picking up on those pieces. And the research calls that social gating, that young children look to us to see, how should I feel about this? And with this circumstance of capacity being fluid, families' abilities are either mobilized and crippled or enhanced. Otherwise, or in other terms, they close down and decrease, or they open up depending on that arousal system. So let's explore this arousal system, and then we're going to slow down and hear from you all. So this is that continuum that I mentioned. This is the visual we like to use. At the bottom stair, this is calm. We're connected to calm. Things are going well. As we move up, we become a little bit more alert. Then families may move up and they show up in an alarm state. This is state-dependent functioning. If that's not checked, they move up into fear. Worst case scenario, they show up terrified. Now we can move up and down this continuum, because guess what research tells us, specific to early childhood? That the longer young children are with adults, meaning that adult who shows up at 8:45, the way their brain is at 12:10 and at 3:10, they're not the same adult. Guess why? Because they've moved up and down this arousal continuum. And most times they're completely unaware of it, because most of us are unaware of our feelings and emotions and we can't name them. But this awareness helps us, if we feel ourselves moving up that arousal continuum, to do some practical things to bring us back down. Or for us who work with children and families, that when you recognize that parent or family moving up the continuum, we do some things to help them connect to our calm, to help them move back down. All right? So when parents and families have an increase in stress and an increase in fear or threat, they move up this arousal staircase. And each time they move up, a different part of the brain is in charge of the various states. We've got to be more than mindful of where that family might be within this arousal continuum at any given time. Yeah, that's our job. That's part of our role. Because this has many implications. for supporting stress and implementing what we like to call trauma responsive practices within your program, your school, your agency, or even your classroom. So there are three big buckets that we see that activate the stress responses from families. Showing up to your program and everything is new or novel. These events, these experiences, they're unfamiliar to me as a parent, and I perceive some of them as dangerous. I immediately start moving up that continuum. If I show up in your program and there's unpredictability, some days I show up and there's someone at the front desk who tells me to sign in and have a seat. Other days I show up, no one's there, and I wait for 20 minutes before I see someone in the hallway. This level of uncertainty and constant sense of what change for many parents and families can move them up that arousal continuum. This third one is when parents and families have no personal agency or control. That means I show up to your parent group, but I actually have no control over what happens. I have no say. So therefore I develop no agency. This poses a threat to me. And oftentimes, you know what happens? I might not come back. And when I negotiate with you, what you may experience is that experience showing up continuously, because what happened? My arousal step was activated. So I moved from calm to alert. And when now I negotiate with you, I show up in an alarm state because I'm unsure of what will happen. And I feel like I'm not in control. And not being in control taps into my prior history. So now we're going to really unpack each one of these five. So let's start at the bottom. This calm state in the arousal. Here, families feel safe and comfortable. The top part of their brain is working well, and it keeps them feeling what? Regulated. Here, families can think in more abstract ways. Here, they're open to what? Reflection and even curiosities when they've connected to calm. Yep. So one of the ways that I've been working with a school in Marin City for 4 years, where once a month I do a parent facilitation Thursday evenings, then I spend all day Friday with the faculty and staff. And one of the things that we do, because it's necessary, because the parents are coming from work, they provide the childcare, they feed the children, they feed all the parents that come, because that helps them connect to calm. And we don't use a lot of slide decks, we use a lot of prompts, and they kind of facilitate and tell us what they need to learn. And then I just guide them through that. And what we find is doing it that way, they become really curious and really reflective in the moment with each other. It's because they show up in the environment. The external input helps them connect to calm. All right? So here, during these times, these families may even consider their past, their present, and their hopes for their future for themselves and their children, because they're calm. Here, in this calm state, is when families are able to plan ahead and think rationally. It's in this calm state. I know personally, I've had to meet with parents who were in their alert and alarm state, and I wanted them to plan ahead, and they couldn't, because I wasn't aware that they were in that other arousal state and they hadn't connected to calm. And what I was asking them to do was nearly impossible. All right? Here, we've got to recognize that all of our interactions with parents and families inherently involve activating a stress response. I'll say it again. All of our interactions with parents and families involve activating a stress response. When I learned that, it blew my mind. I never thought, oh, each time I interface with a parent and family, I could be activating that stress response. I mean them well, but my intention and the impact sometimes are not what aligned. Because here, we're often exposing parents and families to what? Something new. And sometimes learning is difficult and sometimes it's easy, because the learning is what? Attached to the creation for many parents and families of a memory. So our takeaway before we move to alert here is, even in the calm state, a parent may appear temporarily distracted, they may fidget, or they may even appear disengaged. It doesn't mean that they're not calm, because there's subsequent shifts here when parents are bouncing up and down when they're first meeting you between calm and alert, calm and alert. So take heed to that it doesn't mean they've moved all the way up. They're shifting back and forth as they're making sense of who you are and determining if you're a threat or not. Ideally, in terms of working with parents and families, we're looking for what we call the sweet spot of family engagement, which is really engagement that's motivating and simultaneously challenging, but not overwhelming. It's motivating and simultaneously challenging, but not overwhelming. All right? Let's move up this arousal staircase. At the alert phase or state or stage, here you may notice families are thinking in more concrete and less creative terms about their interactions. Here, families are oftentimes less able to engage in reflection here. We should still maintain a level of interest in how they're reacting to the information and the input. But take note that family sense of time becomes narrower here, and the consideration of hours and days ahead becomes really narrower. So planning ahead becomes somewhat difficult. Here at this alert state, families may be a little bit nervous about things that are new or unfamiliar. So changes in the program, changes in roles and responsibilities, they become alert and say, what's happening? Why are we making these changes? But our structure, our routine, and simple things like supportive words can reassure them and help them move down that arousal continuum back to calm. The other piece to take note here is a family's history with adverse experiences. They're going to be much more sensitive to that stress or those changes. The other part is their alarm state, their amygdala may actually be in default mode for families who live in perpetual stressful situations. So therefore, they may leap out of the alert into the alarm, or leap from alert past alarm into fear far more quickly. So your engagement with them won't reach the higher part of the brain while they're emotionally dysregulated. And you can go back to part 1 to look at more ways that parents and families show up in dysregulated state. Let's move up this arousal continuum to the alarm. Here, when parents and families are in the alarm and you're negotiating space with them, if you pay attention, oftentimes their breathing and their heart rate become faster and their muscles become more tense. You might see it in their neck or even in their arms. They're not going to be able to store and process the information you want them to talk about effectively or efficiently, because here it's going to be much harder for them to focus. You may even notice a change in how they speak and how they move, because it's becoming harder for them to think rationally. Here's a good indication that I often see. They go back to talking about the past. But the present and the future become nearly impossible for them to discuss or even consider. In the alarm state, when we think of being trauma responsive, parents and families are more sensitive to how you even look at them. How many of you have had a parent say, "What are you looking at?" And you were thinking, "I wanted to say good morning." And before you could say good morning, they gave you, "What are you looking at? Why are you looking at me that way?" And they walk away saying a variety of things. Your tone of voice and even your posture when parents are in the alarm state could activate them even more. On our end, it requires curiosity and offering the grace on behalf of parents and families for us to model consistently and continuously how to connect the calm regarding our thoughts and feelings. Here, being negative, when parents are in the alarm state saying, well, today was the day you were supposed to hand that in. So if you don't hand it in today, then you and your child can't participate. If someone's in an alarm state, that is not the right time to have that type of conversation with them, because they've already regressed to a lower level of functioning. What I would do if I were you, even if that was the date, say, you know what, let's see if we can talk about this tomorrow. Let's not even worry about it today. Yeah, all right, just sign your kid out and you all stay safe and stay well, and we'll see you tomorrow. I would not try to engage them if they're in the alarm state. And many of us end up doing it unknowingly, and then it escalates and it escalates and it escalates. And unfortunately, we don't see our role and responsibility in the escalation. And you all don't have to agree with me, but I know I've done it in the past, and I had to learn from those experiences. So as we move up this arousal continuum, we get to fear. Excuse me. Here's where parents and families are reactive to their surroundings in the environments. Here is where we experience parents and families where they're ready to fight, they're ready to flight and run away, or they're ready to freeze. This becomes ever present. This fight, flight, and freeze response to us, our program, our school, our practices, or just our presence sometimes. Here, they've completely lost sense of time in terms of it's restricted to just a few minutes or even a few seconds. Here, they're feeling overwhelmed. And if they articulate anything, what you're going to hear is overwhelm. Here, any suggestion or recommendation you make is not going to be easily integrated, because here the level of distrust has escalated, even for someone who they historically have trusted. Here, they're not understanding the ramifications of what went right and what went wrong. They're in a heightened fear state. They're going to refuse to do what you say. And most of the time, they're looking for a chance to what? Run away and escape what is expected of them at the moment. Our role is to accept how they're feeling in the moment and show that we understand. Here's the example I like to use. So the parent comes and they say, I called on the phone and, the receptionist, Tammy, she was rude and disrespectful to me. Now, your understanding of Tammy is that Tammy receives the staff award every year for being responsive and respectful. But instead of saying that, it becomes really important to say, what did Tammy say and do? Just become curious about it and accept it. What they need to hear is, yep, Tammy was disrespectful and rude. I hear exactly what you said and I believe it. Not your version of Tammy, but their version of Tammy. It's not trying to get them to accept your version. It's us accepting their version. And oftentimes that becomes hard for us, which is why parents and families stay in those elevated states. Their behavior may seem irrational to you, but that irrationality that you're thinking about, when you turn it over, your reframe should be, right now this parent is trying to survive. Right now this parent is sitting here with me in this office and they need these diapers, or they need this additional support, or they just need to talk to me. Or right now they just need to sign their child in, even though their child is 15 minutes late. They're trying to survive. How do I understand that fear state of arousal and rethink how I see them showing up? Unfortunately, some of our families are going to show up terrorized by the world, by their relationships, unfortunately by some of our programs, by their work life, and by just challenges that seem overwhelming. What you need to understand is that the bottom part of their brain is taking charge. They have no sense of time. Sometimes they have no sense of where they are or even what they're doing when terror is leading the way. They're not thinking anymore. I've actually seen this happen in many early learning settings where parents were terrorized and they showed up and it seemed like they were losing it because no one labeled it as this person's arousal is at that max. They're at the top of that staircase. we're seeing that parent and family reflexes to circumstances and situation, right? So our desire to want them to what? Rationalize and talk about it, that can't happen there. What we might see is them becoming very still. You might see them rocking back and forth. If you notice these things, it's important not to get too close because they might lash out or they might run away. We need to keep them safe as possible, as safe as possible. Because it's going to take time for that terror state to what? Subside, and for them to start coming down that arousal continuum. But in order to provide a sense of safety and a source of safety that includes comfort and reassurance, here's the piece. We've got to keep track of our own brain states, right? And we've talked about lots of referencings over the last 2 years around this thing called self-care and looking after ourselves, right? We see it in social media and the news every day. But if we don't take time to indulge in these activities, then when parents and families show up at the top of that arousal continuum, guess what we'll end up doing inadvertently? Shooting up the continuum and meeting them right there, opposed to staying at the bottom and helping them connect to our calm. We call that mirror neurons. So what we want to do now is we want to take a break from hearing me and my voice. We're going to do what a colleague of mine often says, you do you. So we're going to take a break and you're going to go into breakout rooms with 2 other people. So each breakout room is going to have 3 people. So all of you who have your cameras off, we need you to step up and cut your camera on and be available to talk with the other 2 people, because that creates equity. When people go into breakout rooms on Zoom and there are black screens, it creates an inequity. It creates an inequity. I just need you to know that. Share it with everybody. I know sometimes some of us, because of our own systems of how we learn, it becomes easier to cut the camera off, which is why I don't stress about people doing it. But in the breakout room, that is the time to cut your camera on and to be ready to participate. So we're going to give you some time here to talk. And what you're going to talk about related to state-dependent functioning, you're going to share how you take care of yourself. You're going to share what strategies you use when you're stressed. Then you're going to share how you recover. How do you recover from distractions, disturbances, and disruptions? We're going to give you some time, the 3 of you, to talk about this. So take notes, because when we come back, we're going to hear from a variety of you. I'm just going to call people's names when you come back. All right. So be prepared to share out how you and your trio talked about ways you take care of yourself, strategies you use when you're stressed, and when you're distracted or disturbance and disruptions surface, how do you recover? You do you. How do you recover? Let's take some time and do that, because this is going to be a great resourcing for many of us who want to practice self-care in more deeper ways. All right, welcome back. Welcome back. I quickly ran through rooms just to make sure no one was in the room by themselves. And it looked like every room I went into out of the 16 rooms, people were engaged in different levels of conversation. So that was exciting. Because those of you who know, who've been here before, I always get nervous when I come to First Five and do breakout rooms, because there's usually so many people and I never know who's really here and who's not. And we've had some experiences where we push people into breakout rooms and people were in there and the other people weren't there. So thank you all for, number one, hearing my words and cutting your cameras on and participating. I'm telling you, it elevates the experience from human to human for everyone. And it looked like over 90% of you did that. So thank you. So now I would love to hear from anyone who is prepared to share a little bit of what you and your team discuss around self-care strategies, what you do, what they hope to do, what they don't do. It looks like Amparo, you unmuted?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Oh.
We did in our breakout room, we took turns and went around and we discussed our self-care. I heard from others, outdoor activities. So like self-care could be just any outdoor activity such as going to the park, to lake, rivers, beach. Um, I heard music. Music is a big one. Decompressing through music and, after a traumatic experience. Music, gathering with family, talking to someone, friends, family, gathering over good food, maybe a cocktail, a small glass, a glass of wine,
Yes.
um,
Cabernet, Shawn
Cabernet
loves
or
Cabernet.
chocolate. What else did we hear? I think those were for the most part, just switching the switch. So switching it, getting yourself out of that moment. So like an imminent self-care technique that I use is like, I just close my door. I keep my office nice and cool. I close the door, close my blinds, take a few breaths. If we have a, trauma or some type of situation that's going on site,
Mhm.
I can just, or also leaving, taking a break and actually leaving my work and going for, just in my car or to
Mhm.
get something to drink
Yeah.
and come back. So removing myself from the situation. Those are some things that work in the moment. But I would say for the most part, it's also if you have pets, I think my dog always makes me feel good once I get home. And another thing is setting boundaries. So one thing that I said was keeping my work life separate from my personal life. Like I know with social media and everybody's so involved with social media. And as soon as you start at a new employer, right away your colleagues are like, oh, what's your Facebook? What's your Instagram? What's your Snapchat? I'm very friendly and I'm a team player and all. But I think just like setting up those boundaries from day one, like I let them know, oh, I keep my personal life separate from work. They tend not to like ask me for my social media, and that just works well for me, because sometimes when you are friends with your colleagues, coworkers, it just becomes more personal, and they can, ask more questions, and you may not feel comfortable with that. Also with our residents, I serve almost 180 residents, individuals here. I have had colleagues that have accepted them on their social media, and I would never do that with clients, residents, anyone that I work with, because I need to set those boundaries. Because
Thank you, Amparo. Awesome.
Thank you.
Jess, you have your hand up.
Yes, we talked about our self-care. We went around the room and talked about how we did self-care. A lot of us pray, read the Bible, take ourselves out of the situation. And I did say debrief with a coworker. If it's we do have cases that are a little bit difficult and we need to talk it out, I do find it very helping when I contact my coworker and be like, oh my gosh, this happened, and what do you do in this situation, and also working out is also a good self-care.
Awesome. Thank you. Maybe one more. Someone else want to share? If your group discuss how they recover from distractions, disturbances, and disruptions, did anyone get to that part in your group?
We did also cover that. Sorry.
Jess, let's let Flandra go. Flandra raised her hand.
Hi, good afternoon, or good morning still. So yeah, we did talk about the recovery process, and one of our team members has a thought process of just being on automatic, so she doesn't really get a chance to come back and revert because she's on automatic. It's just kind of like I'm piloting this thing and I'm gonna just keep going in it. But the other ones, we thought about mapping. So that's one of the things that we do, how we recover from distraction and or disturbance or disruption, is one of the young ladies spoke about not going home with the information in the chat that they just spoke about. And we also too spoke about that. And she mentioned that she doesn't want to take it home to her husband. So she started mapping. And I said, I think I'm on automatic there, because immediately I'm mapping out, is this worth my time? How do I deliver? How do I deal with it? How do I become part of. But one of the things I think that we spoke about best is that we start to become, and I equated it to being a doctor and or a nurse over ourselves in situations, but we go into triage. And so we go into the preparation of, how do I not be distracted? How do I work through this disturbance? How do I combat this disruption? And it all starts with self at the end of the day, and the thinking in which we move in these things. So we had a lot going on, and mindfulness and all that great stuff. So it's definitely something that, we set around it, but triaging is what set with me the most, is being a triage over our own distractions and disruptions.
Thank you, Flandra. Appreciate it hearing from all of you. And you can definitely, if anyone feels so inclined, if the things you didn't hear that were shared in your group and you feel like you can, please share it in the chat, because we are resourcing from each other on other things that we can do around self-care. So before we move, I just want to offer up that we often hear about this self-care and we talk about one side of self-care. Self-care actually has two sides. And this is really related in many respects to trauma. So if we talk about, oh, I do self-care, I walk, I do self-care, I make sure that I take my breaks at work, I do self-care, something it took me years to do. I don't take work home. I was one of those people that would say, I'm going to take Yvette's evaluation. I'm going to complete it at home. I'm going to read this when I get home. My bag would get filled with stuff. Then I would carry it home and realize I did this for years before I realized I never opened my bag. I would bring it all back and then put it on my desk. And it took me years to realize, you know what? And people who I mentor, I share this with them. I say, don't create to-do lists, create today lists. Meaning, today I'm going to have that parent meeting with the Johnsons. That's all I plan on my today list. And I say, when you do that, you end up doing 4 things, but the thing you set out to do, you accomplish it. So your internal system and external systems actually feel more accomplished and better because you actually did that one thing you said to do. I have one mentor who she lives in Concord, and she works in Oakland. And I said, every day when you get in your car, put one sticky note on the rearview mirror and write one thing you're going to do when you get to work. Just one, not 4, not 3, not 2, just one. And we went sometime when we met. I said, how's the sticky note thing going? She was like, oh my God, I got all 3 of my kids doing it. It's working tremendously, because she only had one thing and she was accomplishing it. That's an aspect of self-care. The harder part of self-care is accepting, naming, and realizing those things we don't do well. It's the part most of us never want to contend with. So part of my self-care and full transparency was, I will stay up to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and have an 8 o'clock in the morning presentation. People say, oh, it's a bad habit, but it just became a part of my functioning. And then my self-care was simply, Shawn, you're going to be in the bed at midnight. Because I knew enough about myself. I'm not one of those people that can do things in bed. I have colleagues that, they'll eat food in bed, they'll read books in bed, they'll watch TV in bed. If I get in the bed, my old butt is going to sleep. So that's the benefit, that once I hit the bed, it tells my body, go ahead and go to sleep. So my commitment for self-care was get in the bed every day by midnight. Guess what was happening? I was falling to sleep. So instead of staying up to 2 or 3 o'clock, and this was me looking at the weakness. It wasn't, I'm doing this necessarily to take care of myself, but it was, what are the things I don't do well that I want to do, become more effective at? And it was getting in bed and going to sleep and getting more rest throughout the night when the sun wasn't up. So that's the other part of self-care that we don't want to contend with. What are the things I don't do well? How can I resource? I can be very reactive sometimes, depending on the person. they send me the wrong email and I haven't had my coffee yet, I'm known to hit reply and start typing away. One of the things I've had to learn how to do is I still type and then I put save in my drafts and I never hit send. So these are all aspects of things I don't do well. I recognize them, name them, and begin to work on them. So as you contend with, because your work is rich, your work is challenging, supporting children and their families in a variety of capacities. If you don't take care of you, then we can't do the work of supporting and helping them. Thank you all. Rosalino, you raised your hand?
Yes, I just wanted to share all the things that we talked about as self-care. It's really good. But the other thing that I want to point out is there's also the other side of the chemistry part, what's happening in our body when we're stressed out, how our body releases our cortisol level. And you have to learn to have your body digest that, because, you know, I mean, for me, no matter what I do, if I'm stressed out, if my cortisol level is up there, I'm not going to be able to really relax, because and I have to accept that my cortisol level is up there, and I need to, you know, to do something to make that go down. So, you know, I mean, just wanted to share that, because a lot of people don't realize that you're kind of like, you know, when you're in a fight and flight mode, that's what's happening. Your cortisol level is high. That's why you get aroused. So I just wanted to share that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So as we move forward, we all need to consider this notion that stress is contagious, so is calmness. Stress is contagious, and so is calmness. And this is because of mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are designed to aid us in our ability to understand what another person feels or experiences. It supports us in that. When our mirror neurons are activated, even if we witness someone else taking action. So if I witness someone moving towards me, my mirror neurons are activated. If someone gestures for assistance, my mirror neurons are activated. If I notice someone's experiencing emotion, my mirror neurons are activated. If I observe someone crying, my mirror neurons are activated. So in terms of state-dependent functioning in our brains and working with families to be trauma responsive, you've got to consider how your mirror neurons are activated, how families and parents' mirror neurons are activated based on how we position ourselves and how we show up or how we don't show up, or the structuring of our program. And some of that we covered in part 1. So we actually want us to all think about one of the keys to being trauma responsive is to make sure that we're tuned, that we're equitable, and our practices are grounded in regulation for ourselves and families, that they're grounded in what we call being top down, bottom regulation, and intentional disconnection. Because this notion of being regulated in relational regulation is actually what we call it. It's a powerful way for us to buffer the stress. In that the families and parents we work with, they can experience safety in our presence if our presence has what? Respect and care. So our question for reflection is, how do I demonstrate respect and care? How does my program, my agency, or my school demonstrate respect and care? So I have a few notions for how we can do that. We can be dependable. Be someone a parent and family can trust. Dig into that. Listen attentively. Really pay attention when you're together. Don't be distracted. Don't be so focused on taking notes. Sometimes people need you not to write, and they need you to do like this and say, wow. Some people, that is definitely an aspect of how they need to feel listened to in terms of building relationships. Parents and families need you to believe in them. And this belief is really grounded in making them feel known and valued. Yeah. I love this one. To demonstrate warmth. So here's how we define this. show parents and families that you enjoy being with them. Show parents and families that you enjoy being with them. And this was a growth spurt for me. When I think about this, when I look back to when I was a center director or a parent, and there were families and parents that I did not enjoy. So I avoided them like the plague. But I wasn't trauma responsive then. So now that I'm trauma responsive, I'm going to need to show up and do some things to what? Show warmth in terms of relational responses. And then this fifth point of consideration is encouragement. We've got to remember small and large, but mostly those small wins. We've got to acknowledge and give voice to parents and families' efforts and achievements. Even if you think this is something they should just do because, yeah, well, maybe this is a different type of work for them. So we've got to encourage them. So encouragement, demonstrating warmth, belief in them, attentive listening, and dependability in the context of helping them feel safe, and how we demonstrate respect and care. Respect and care. Our jobs, regardless of our agency, our school, our program, is to create an environment, that shared environment with families, parents and families as decision makers, so that they feel safe and regulated. So that they feel safe and regulated, because that gives them opportunities to what? Make real decisions, leadership decisions. And that comes from Dr. Bruce Perry. And for us, we've got to figure out how to build in short regulation breaks throughout our workday when we're working with families with small T and big T traumas, right? Because the more stress that you experience, the more frequently you're going to need short regulation breaks. I wish I had known this early in my career, the benefit of taking 10 minutes and walking out the building and walking around the corner and coming back. I do it now often if I'm in spaces, but I wish I knew it when I was in a preschool classroom and I was a center director, because I would stay in the building for pretty much 10 hours or 12 hours out of the day. But taking 10 short minutes could actually recalibrate you in a meaningful way. These are actions that I encourage you all to take. This other action that you can take is decreasing the number of times you have to make decisions. In this work of child and family work, in early childhood, we have to sometimes make many decisions at once. And these decisions can cause us what? Fatigue. It can cause us to not think as well, to not resource as well. So part of the action is, how can you make less decisions in one day? And for your supervisors on here, when you and your staff are stressed, we've got to figure out a way to reduce the what? The workload, to reduce the workload. So one of my jobs, many of you know, I work for Yale University as a program manager, and I'm a lead trainer there for our child scale tool. And the other two trainers left, which meant there was one sole person doing national training. And one of the first things that had to happen was what? My workload had to be reduced, which meant we start telling people, no, we can't do that. We can do it later in the fall. We can do it in the winter. What does your 2023 look like? It was the first thing, because had that not happened, I probably wouldn't be here today. I would probably be in the bed or somewhere with some Cabernet. Truth. As we recognize our own stress increasing in those of what the people we work with, what we find is communal learning helps. So what we mean by communal learning is when we come together, that can actually decrease our stress. The caveat is coming together with the right people, because you can come together with the wrong people and your stress could increase, right? So figuring out who those people are. In Res Dominican, who you're going to hear from later in the short video, he talks about, for us to do this work, that partnership should be a triad. It should be you and only two other people, not 5, not 7, not a small group of 10, but you and only 3 people who you trust and who you work well with, and coming together as an action to decrease your stress, to work with families. And then here's one that I keep saying I want to step into, but there's something about my own internal constitution that won't allow it in the way that I think this should take place. This notion of mind wandering before making decisions, mind wandering before making decisions. So as a child, something I love to do, I love to color as a child. So one of the things that I'm stepping into in terms of letting my mind wander is adult coloring books and my crayons. They're right here on my desk. And really forcing myself, because I enjoy it, to take time for me to see that as mind wandering, to aid me in my own self-care and my own work, to work with agencies and schools and people, and many of you. All right. So we're going to jump into the next part in our final 30 minutes, which are the principles and practices in the book, the core principles of trauma responsive practice. So the first principle is this notion of how do we build mutually respectful and trusting relationships that lead to this notion of power sharing partnerships. And this is what we have in the book. Now, in full transparency, Shawn struggles with the words power sharing. I'm always trying to think, how do we replace that word power? Because my personal opinion is when we talk about power and we talk about shifting things like oppression, if there's power, then that means there's power over. Even if it's shared power, we're using the old structure to try to create something new. So we therefore create what? The continuous problem. So I struggle with the word power, even though it's in the book. But what we mean by this, is really building relationships that are attuned and compassionate. Relationships that strengthen trusting connections with parents, right? And relationships that can buffer stress to help support coping, healing, and wellness through attunement. And here we see some of this as differences don't make people wrong. That's how we demonstrate respect. Reciprocity, diversity is what we call life enhancing. It doesn't take away or make it more difficult. In the responsiveness, this is one of my favorites. There is always a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth choice. Always. We just haven't thought about it. And how are you embodying what we call emergent listening with families? That we show up with no agenda, but just to listen. Building mutually respectful and trusting relationships. The second principle in practice is understanding stress and trauma. All right, I'm not going to go too much into that one because I know most people on this call over the last 2 years, you've probably been in at least 4 to 5 trauma trainings. But here we just want to understand that trauma does not define the family or parent, and that trauma, past or present, it can leave a parent or family feeling a little less complete, with some loss of control, even when they show up and enroll or enlist and sign up for your program, or even if they're forced to sign up. But understanding stress and trauma and going back to that opening video can help us do this. Principle number 3 talks about acknowledging systems of privilege and oppression. This is my favorite principle. And how do we take actions to disrupt the inequities? So this taking action is really about avoiding re-traumatizing families and parents in your program. It's about your program and your agency avoiding re-traumatizing you. So how do we disrupt and redesign policies, programs, and practices in the conditions that come from them that have been traditionally harmful to children, to families and communities, and even the workforce of early childhood and children and family services? How do we do this different? In doing this different is part of becoming trauma responsive and family engagement. And this is acknowledgement of the uneven playing field that exists for children and families in early childhood and the workforce. So if we do some things here, increasing our awareness of what oppression is and how it's reproduced and duplicated in early childhood in particular, right? That's important for us to understand. Who are the marginalized and negatively impacted people where the result of trauma, is magnified? And often we find those marginalized groups right in early childhood programs. We've all got to develop an awareness of how professionally, if we don't have the awareness of this personally, we end up perpetuating these oppressive ways of being, knowing, and doing. So we're gonna unpack this a little bit more. Increasing your awareness of oppression is an act. It's an action that you can do, which means dig deep into Robin DiAngelo's what is oppression? Figure out what do we mean when we talk about this term in terms of early childhood and child and family services? How did you become aware of that? And then how do you link it to your own program and what you all are doing? Figure out what's missing. What has been significantly missing in terms of language and frameworks and practices in addressing children and parents and families by reckoning with the histories of trauma. So here's a quote from one of the co-authors of the book. She says, if we're not willing to be changed or impacted ourselves, then we are not doing trauma responsive work. So what we're really talking about here, and she unpacks it more in the book, we're talking about racial trauma, because it's too often not acknowledged or discussed, but we all know that it significantly impacts treatment of children and parents and families. Children and parents and families. I love this quote. Before we can build trust, we must acknowledge histories and sources of distrust. Before we can build trust, we must acknowledge histories and sources of distrust. So the curious question here is, when you go back to your agencies and programs, if you had a chat with people, and in that time, in that meeting, in that workshop and training, all you discussed was that agency's history and potential sources of distrust with the parents and families and children that you aim to serve, I wonder what might surface. I wonder what might surface. I remember one agency, I won't name them right now. They reached out to me and they said, we want your help. And I said, with what? They said, well, in the last 15 years, no matter what we do, Black families in Alameda don't show up. And I started to giggle. And they said, Shawn, why are you giggling? And I said, well, everybody here is white. That's a starting place. I can see that. Ray Charles could see that. So what are the histories and the sources of distrust, right? We got to name them and move past it. Name them and move past it. So a question for reflection is, how do we as early childhood professionals begin the process of addressing distrust with parents and families? You can do this all year with parents and families. I'm telling you, if you do it and don't let go, much will be revealed. Much will be revealed. So these next 3 slides, we're gonna kind of look at this notion of what do we mean by decontextualize in terms of our principle and practice and the impact of family trauma, right? So most of us have known the last 2 years, there's been lots of racial reckoning, injustices. I could ask you right now to put in the chat examples of traumas in the last year, and the chat would fill up. Let's do that. Let's take 30 seconds in the chat. Examples of trauma that you've seen or experienced in just the last 12 months. Just put one in there that you've seen or experienced from parents and families, happened to you in your neighborhood, your work. Examples of different traumas in the last year. Just put it in the chat. Joanne said divorce. Just put them in there. Put them in there. There are 44 of us on the call. Job loss, Leah says. Examples of different traumas in the last year. DM, death and loss, immigration, yes, death, school shootings, unemployment, war, interpersonal violence, home visitation robberies, homelessness, children taken from their families, inflation, yes, Kimberly, isolation due to COVID, that's driving my mother crazy, racism, child abuse, miscarriage, pandemic, crime, affordable housing. If you're in the Bay Area, God bless you. School shootings, homeless on the street, clinical depression, mental health and wellness issues, family member passing, mental health, police killing of Black people. Name it, Valerie, name it. Call it, and it shall be. Folks driving crazy, COVID, child abuse and neglect, road rage, COVID, home violence. The list goes on, right? So here what we want to do, thank you all for that. You can keep them going. Rising cost of groceries and gas. Hashtag truth. So this notion of this word decontextualize, this means when things are seen in isolation from the context. And oftentimes when you negotiate space-time with families, you're seeing things in isolation from the context. They're decontextualized, all right? And then when we understand trauma here, we're talking about an individual response to an event that overwhelms the individual's stress response over time. As someone said earlier, that cortisol level, it increases and it doesn't what? Decrease. It doesn't decrease. So what we want to do now in these next two slides, in this one, we're going to listen to Resmaa Menakem. He's the author of My Grandmother's Hands and The Quaking of America, and another book that he wrote for couples on relationships. I have them all. But here we're going to listen to him talk about trauma decontextualized, where he was on Good Day LA at the end of last year. Trauma decontextualized. Trauma decontextualized. Let's listen and let's see if you can hear some takeaways. And as you hear those takeaways, put them in the chat box. Put them in the chat box.
For more than 20 years, trauma therapist Resmaa Menakem has been doing work around racial equality and the traumatic impact of racism in the United States. The need for us to recognize this trauma, metabolize it, work through it, and grow from it. Resmaa examines the damage caused by racism from the perspective of trauma and body-centered psychology. I recently caught up with him virtually. I read you said the words, I'm a cultural trauma navigator. What does that mean?
Well, first off, I really try and acknowledge the fact that we live, especially if you're in a Black body or you're in a brown body, we live in a society, in a culture that can be traumatizing to us and has been traumatizing to us and our people. And so I really take that seriously. I don't like throw that away. I believe that, when you live in a structure that's predicated on the white body being the standard of humanness, then every other body is a deviance from that standard. And that is traumatizing off top before anything else is done. And so that's what I mean, helping people to navigate that, helping people understand that they're not defective intrinsically or innately, that structurally we have not been considered human.
I have been so fascinated with the fact that we are finally beginning to have conversations about the effect of trauma on us, right? We are starting that conversation as a world, as a nation, as a people. Now, you're even taking it a step further about looking at what that trauma, because we've learned to understand that trauma stays in the body in a way it doesn't stay in the brain, right?
That's right. That's right. The body, see, people, a lot of treatment over the years in order to deal, that people have developed in order to deal with trauma has been focused on cognition. Okay. And cognition can't touch the body when it's trying to protect itself, right? And trauma, one of the things I always say to people is that trauma over time can be decontextualized. The march of time decontextualizes trauma. Okay. So trauma in a person over time can look like personality. Trauma in a family over time can look like family traits.
Oh my.
Trauma in a people over time can look like culture. And so beginning to help people navigate that and work with that, work with the notions, you know, sis, like being a Black person in any type of environment, especially a corporate environment or especially an environment which we work in, you have to navigate and pick up on vibrations and notions and notions of things.
Nuances.
And sometimes we think we're crazy. Sometimes we think, man, you know, I'm picking up on something, but I don't quite have the word for it. And sometimes that notion is a pass-through from other generations. It is the thing that got passed down that never got worked through. And by the time it gets to you, there's no context for it. So it just works in the body.
Ooh, brother, you're blowing people's minds right now. There are going to be people that are, I'm sure you have come across this before where people are like, now he's just talking crazy. How do you respond to them? How do you get them to understand that this is real and it is so urgent in our communities?
What I tell people to do is, you don't have to believe me, believe your body. Just slow down. Just slow down. Just stop. Just pause. Listen to what I'm saying and don't do nothing with it. Just pause and listen to what your body tells you. Is there a constriction? Is there a movement? Is there a snarl? Is there a hum? Is there a rock? Is there something that wants to move? Is there an urge? Is there a vibration? Is there a temperature change? Just notice that. You ain't got to believe me. Just become accustomed to slowing and conditioning and tempering your body so you can take in both the things that show up that's constrictive and the joy.
Wow. The fact that you start there, it's a door opening, because then you now can have a conversation with people who might not be willing to meet you on the work that you're doing. There is a way to heal trauma in the body, correct? Or are we destined to only understand it and not heal it?
Never that. Our people survived some of the most heinous brutality and viciousness. And if you say that there was no healing in that process, I would push back against you. The fact of the matter is that trauma can be healed, but we have only developed individual approaches to a communal horror. What has happened to a lot of our people didn't happen to us individually, it happened communally. So to only develop individual responses to a communal horror and a communal brutality is inadequate. And part of what I've been trying to help people do is to begin to develop with other bodies a culture, what I call a living embodied anti-racist culture and practices. So those things that could emerge as healings have a place to sprout up from, rather than just trying to give people tips or strategies.
Are people listening?
Some are, right? And some are just performing.
Interesting. I get that. I see the difference.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, Resmaa, you and I have communicated on social media. I've been watching your work for some time, interested in this area of trauma and the effect it has on Black and brown bodies and Indigenous bodies. And I was struggling to figure out how we could have the conversation, because it's like eating an elephant. But you kind of counseled me that it is like eating an elephant one bite at a time. This is a great starting point for people. If they want more information, they can follow you on social media. You're very vocal there. On Instagram, your videos people can hear straight from you. And also they can pick up your book, My Grandmother's Hands, a New York Times bestseller. I cannot thank you enough for making time for me today. Minneapolis, you stay strong, brother. Thank you so much for being with us.
I appreciate you so much, sis. Thank you.
Take care and stay safe. Resmaa said, if you don't believe me, believe your body. Ooh, special stuff.
It's like the second level up from Bessel. He talks about the body keeps score, racialized trauma. Thank you all for, I've been watching that chat, and Leanne, you've been putting so much, and Risa and Dawn and Valerie and Sarah Bell and Flandra, definitely. Let's get into some things he said here around trauma being decontextualized. Trauma being decontextualized in our few last 11 minutes together. So this notion of trauma being decontextualized in working with families. So Resmaa said that trauma in the family decontextualized over time, it looks like family traits. You know, when we say, oh, those are those Jacksons. That's how they are. Those Vasquez boys, that's just how they are. What we're doing when we say this is we're perpetuating trauma. We're making excuses for traumatized behavior in our communities, in our programs, even in our families. And we push it off because it's what? Decontextualized. And he's saying if we contextualize it through a trauma lens, we see it completely different. Right? Then he says, trauma in a person decontextualized over time looks like personality. We all have that one person at the job with a really poor attitude, and it's really a personnel issue that no one's been brave enough to deal with. So instead of that, we just say, oh, Miss Eloise has been here forever. That's just how she is. Bring her some coffee. She'll treat you nice. So I got to bring Eloise coffee that cost me $5 for her to do her damn job because her trauma is showing up. I've had people say these things to me. We say that's her personality when it's really her trauma that she's bringing to work. It's your family's trauma that they're showing up at the school door. That's not that mother's personality. What you're faced with is her trauma because her trauma is presenting itself first and foremost. So you've got to put it in context. And the only way to put it in context is to get to know who they are, Then he talks about trauma in a people decontextualized over time. We call it culture. And he says, some of what you're saying isn't culture at all. It's trauma showing up that we're saying, oh, that's in that part of Oakland, that's how those people are that live there. What? Can we unpack this differently using not just different language, but a different understanding? Little t, big T trauma. And then he ends with, I love this one too. That trauma in our workplaces, decontextualized over time, looks like workplace standards. Well, this is what we do here. And then when we dig deeper, we look at climate and culture of the workplace that is oftentimes what passed down, accepted as the norm when it's really oppressive, right? The same way we think of personality, traits, and culture, these things are passed down. We become what, one researcher called weathered when she looked at specifically Black women being weathered based on trauma. Then we look at these four and assume that what we see when we see parents who show up at our schools, at our programs, at our clinics, in our agencies, that we assume that what we're interfacing with is a lifestyle choice because we haven't considered the other side. And the other side is what? Trauma. A lot to sit with, I know, a lot to sit with. That could have been just one training in and of itself, those 3 slides. So principle number 4 looks at reinforcing messages of safety. And for me, this reinforcing messages of safety, one thing I learned from Resma is safe for whom? Because what I deem as safe, Kimberly and Valerie and Anna may say, that doesn't make me feel safe. So safe for whom when we're reinforcing messages of safety? But we can be predictable. When we tell parents the time, the space, and what's happening, and they show up, we need to honor that. Here's a big one for us to contend with. A sign of a healthy relationship with families is not one absent of conflicts. You might want to screenshot that and hang it on your computer as a reminder, or when you print out this handout, cut it out in color, put it on a sticky note somewhere. Because we all have been tricked into believing that healthy relationships don't have conflicts. That's incorrect, because some of those conflicts are exactly what build resiliency. Principle number 5 tells us to focus on strengths and assets. That parents might be in need in some regards, but they know what their needs are. And we need to move away from this deficit of not knowing, this deficit view, that traditional frame, to this notion that families know what they need. Sometimes they have trouble accessing it or knowing when it's available. And that's when we can come in if we spotlight their strengths, And part of spotlighting those strengths is this notion of family strengths first. I wonder if your enrollment papers considers family strengths first, or is it the last thing? Or do you not even capture it? Look through your paperwork in your program. How are family strengths anchored from the very beginning and throughout their time in your program? How are you anchoring and spotlighting family strengths and assets? Principle number 6 looks at providing opportunities for families to have agency and control. So one of the main programs that actually has this embedded in it, and most of them don't understand it, is our National Head Start program. That policy council is really about providing families in those communities where they access Head Start and early Head Start services to have agency and control over the Head Start program. Now, unfortunately, because of oppression and racism, what ends up happening is people who don't live in those communities end up running the programs, when at the impetus of it was family engagement at the core. The families were supposed to be hired and employed and move up in the program and actually run the programs. That was the vision for Head Start. And unfortunately, it doesn't look that way across our country far too much. Principle number 7, it talks about us using culturally and linguistically and individually responsive practices with families, right? So when we think of this, we need to think of culture as what? A broad concept that's deeply rooted in customs, values, beliefs, languages, social norms, practices among a people that are transmitted, right? From generation to generation to generation to generation to generation. And that plays a significant role in how families are going to show up around what they think and believe and behave, or how they even engage. What do you know about that? And that number 7 looks at violence and trauma can have different meanings across cultures. And that healing takes place within one's own what? Cultural meaning-making system. Healing takes place within that family's own meaning-making system. And that may be a meaning-making system that you have no knowledge of. What do you do then? In your attempt to be what? Trauma responsive. So before we get to the 8th and final principle, here's a concept I want you to just marinate in. When you think of taking the other out and allowing the human in, in response to trauma responsive family engagement. Or I like to say, push the other out and pull the human in short. How can you do this in terms of your work with parents and families? Pushing the other out. So each and every time that something happens, if it's in a policy, if it's in a program or a practice, where parents and families are othered, how can you stop this from happening and pull the human in and push that other out? It's an action you can take. And our final principle, principle number 8, looks at promoting the ability for coping, resilience, and healing. Coping, resilience, and healing. I'm gonna move here kind of fast, Leah, just because I'm trying to pay attention to time. I typically don't pay attention to time, but I'm doing a good job today, Leah. I'm proud of myself. I'm gonna have 2 glasses of Cabernet tonight. So what you see here on the screen are these things called stress responses. So on the far right, toxic stress or severe stress, you see that purple line go up and it stays up. This happens for children and adults. Too often, our programs create this stress response in parents and families, and we're unaware of it. Then there's tolerable stress, that purple line goes up and it starts to come down. And then what happens? That positive stress, oops, I hit the wrong slide, I'm sorry. That positive stress, I call it useful stress. Useful stress is where parents and families and children build resilience. So this notion, when you hear people say children are just resilient, not so, Sally. Let's have a different conversation about that. Not all children are resilient. This resiliency comes as a result of actually experiencing somewhat push and pull, meaning my stress level is activated, but it doesn't stay activated because of what? I have a positive person in my life. And for many of the parents and families, you are that positive person. So when they experience that stress response, unfortunately, you may not even know that you're their anchor. You find them talking to you a little bit more, looking for you when you're not in the office. Those are all indications they've pulled you into their sphere as this positive and useful, and purposeful person. We want to maintain some professional boundaries. But the absence of this, meaning programs that say, we want our parents and families to experience no stress at all. Good luck with that. I'm not sure that's a realistic expectation. But the ones who experience this positive stress, it is how they become resilient when our programs respond to the stress, when we understand the activations responsible for that arousal continuum, those steps, we become useful in our role and responsibility. So when we end with, what do we mean by resilience? We mean having parents and families who experience small t and little t traumas, not just develop coping mechanisms, not just develop strategies, but begin to see those minor bumps, those minor ruptures as what builds resiliency over time. So we've got to hold that in mind and know that that takes time, but that is one of the best ways that we help our families become resilient. It is not the absence of, because what we know is the absence of any stress, it doesn't create positive, productive citizens. Those parents who say, I don't want my child to cry or get a scar at all, they actually become 40-year-olds who can't cope. They're living in their mama's basements forever. This is research, it's not just me. So our parents and families have to experience some of it. So you've got to unpack how you define resilient, how you articulate it, because I find most of us are articulating it incorrectly. So we're giving a false sense of what resiliency is. It is not the absence of stress, but it is the response to it that's short-term and that's building. I call it like shellacking a kitchen floor. My mother always wanted her kitchen floor to shine. And each one of those buffers made it sparkle and shine, and it had to be clean. And it was what resistant to us walking in and out of it. That's what we can provide families with on that path to agency in their response to what small t and capital T or big T traumas and their stress. All right. You've been a great audience today. Thank you for your time and attention. I sped up in the end there, so I want to be fully transparent because I was paying attention to the time. And Leah and I are always mindful that we don't keep you past time. Of course, you're all welcome to join me in social media. You're going to be getting a link from Leah. We need your feedback, because if you don't give the feedback, they won't pay me at first five. That's how they work. And the brother needs his check. All right. It's school time. I got to buy a lot of school sneakers for all these stinky feet boys. And of course, we end our session by asking you to use the chat, the 44 of you that are still here. In the chat, one takeaway from today and how you plan to integrate trauma-responsive family engagement in terms of state-dependent functioning into your work with children and families. So let's end there. Thank you all so much. You can type it in the chat. One takeaway from today and how you plan to integrate trauma-responsive family engagement into your work with children and families. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Stay well, stay healthy, and make sure that you are thriving along the way.